Good morning and good Rosh Chodesh, good Chodesh. Happy Rosh Chodesh. We're in Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 13. What is it? 1311, sorry. Aleph Shiur Aleph. Yeah. The Rebbe Rashab is speaking about the central theme here is L'hoyer es ha'cheshech. I'll just use that term because that's the term he uses. That the L'hoyer es ha'cheshech means that the purpose, in the words that I'm using, Tachlis Brias Adam on 1307, he said, Tachlis Brias Adam lamata. The purpose of man's creation below on earth is to radiate the darkness, the of the lowest world, which is a double darkness, double and double, where, as he explained at length, what is obvious and apparent is the physical and crassness of the world. And godliness is not apparent and revealed at all. And he went on to explain that even though godliness is embedded in existence, but it's not revealed on its own, and is the purpose of our work through contemplation and through stimulating our emotions and through awakening our consciousness, basically, to this divine reality, which is the true essence of existence. That's called radiating the darkness. Then after that longer explanation of how that's done, he says, the ultimate, however, ikar radiating darkness is not just to bring the divine awareness into this world, but actually, and dispel the darkness, but actually, shacheshech yafech, transforming the very darkness. What does that mean exactly? So we learned about this earlier, because we also want that the darkness, that symptom, the very forces that conceal the divine, should also reveal a higher level of divine experience. But what does it mean in a physical sense when you say not just to radiate darkness, but to transform it? So he went in to explain, because darkness has two dimensions to it, two elements, two opinions, but ultimately, like he says, they're both correct. And the two elements is, one is that darkness actually has substance. So there's a part of darkness, like he says, its function and personality is one that conceals light, or the three terms he used. It conceals light, it limits light, and it stops and impedes its flow, its expression or expansion. But there's also cheshech as a bria b'fnei atzmei. It's a separate creation. So that would mean that the L'hoyer es ha'cheshech is also to transform that. If darkness was not a substance of its own, all you can do is dispel it. You can't transform it. So we still need to understand fully what that means. But then, to explain it, he gave an example of the slapshus ha'koiches be'evri haguf. That when the faculties, which on their own are ethereal and soulful, and there radiates light in an unfettered, unbound, and unlimited way, and it's far more, and it's in a spiritual state. When those very faculties enter into a human body, into our limbs and organs, it gets concealed. It gets concealed. First of all, it gets lowered from a more qualitatively from a more spiritual, pure state, neshamas and Gan Eden that can comprehend the muhus of an Eir Eliki, the very personality of divine energy. And now it's only the mitzias of Eir Eliki once they're inside of a body. And also, it's more limited. There would be unlimited, those faculties. In the human body, they become limited and defined. Limited limited is the right word. And finally, the third thing, they become more bahakshama. I don't know if it's the third thing, it's really the first, but he spells it out more. Bahakshama means that they take on tangible, palpable, like a physical, corporeal elements to it, to the point that they actually can relate to physical things, the seichel, and even the spiritual things become far more materialistic, so to speak. And he said the same thing is with the power of vision. And the truth is with all the faculties that enter the person, but the actual examples he gave was the mind, intellect, and the second was the vision. That once it comes into the eye, it sees things also the physical, and it cannot see unlimited. It has a certain limit how far vision can go, even the healthiest vision in this world. In the parentheses, he qualified that even though the limitation of the faculty is not just due to the keli, but the limitation the faculty has on its own is not Hagbola Mamash, he called. As we discussed this, whereas once it comes into the body, into the kelim, that's when it actually has Hagbola Mamash, that you simply cannot go further. Whereas in the Ruchnius, there's a certain, the limit is much more, as I explained, is more in its identity as opposed to its capacity. But even if its capacity has limit, but it's not comparable to the Hagbola Mamish that happens when it comes into a keli. Like he said, the Oyer on its own is far more bipshitus, meaning shapeless and seamless and unlimited than as it comes into the keli, which gives it the real confined state. And that's where we stopped here. By the parentheses, 6-7 lines before the end of the paragraph on page 1311. I'm going to continue from there. We're going to conclude this piece and bring it back to why he brought the whole idea of these faculties in order to explain what it means that the darkness conceals the light. So here's what he says. I'm reading on now. The text can be found, if you want to follow it, at ayinbeis.com. So far he's talked in general about the faculty of seichel, the faculty of riyah, and all the chen, he said, and all the faculties. Now he's going to go back to the general descent of the soul inside the body, that the general avodah of a soul below is far more limited than it is when the soul is above, without the limitation of the body. He said it earlier regarding the comprehension and the understanding of the soul in Gan Eden, as opposed to the soul coming down. He even said, on top of the page. But now he's going to say it in more general, in broader terms. He says, and the same, just as it is with the faculties, same with the service of the soul. The way the soul serves, the avodah of the neshama, bislapshusa beguf, as it manifests and gets enclosed in a body, in contrast to neshama without a guf. Is not at all comparable to the avodah of the neshama before it came inside the body. Like he says, it's written in Tanya, like he writes in Tanya, chapter 37. Talking about a person down below. Even if he were to be at Tzaddik Gomer, a complete Tzaddik. Remember in Tanya at Tzaddik Gomer, person has no Yetzer Hara. His whole life is completely dedicated only to godliness. He serves God with reverence and love of pleasure, which means the highest levels of connection to God. Nevertheless, lo yagia l'mailas dveikuse. He will not reach in this world as a neshama beguf, a soul inside a body, to the quality of dveikuse, l'mailas dveikuse b'Hashem. That's what it says in Tanya. This in the footnote below, they say, add the word le'elam hazeh. That with all this quality that he's at Tzaddik Gomer and serving God on this high level, will not be able, does not reach to the quality of his attachment and his cleaving in God. But Tchila Rechimu, which is also Tchila Rechimu, is love and awe and reverence. Before, prior to his coming down, to the soul coming down to this crass material physical world, which is even stronger. Not only when he reached there, not even the same quality, same, and not even miktsasa, not even like touching it. There was nothing similar. Leiminova, Leimikshasa is a very strong negating. When you say something is not like something else, and you add Leiminova, Leimikshasa means not in that category at all, and not even a drop of it. And there's no comparison and no similarity between them at all. In other words, like two different realities of this Tzaddik Gomer even. To say that a regular person like us down below does not serve with the love and awe and reverence of a soul without a body, okay, that's pretty obvious. But to say it's Tzaddik Gomer, that just shows you what kind of limitation was created by the soul coming inside the body. And yet, the purpose is dafka down here in this dark place. 1 second, one more thing here. I should have read three more words. It's all from chapter 37. Shaguf eni yochel lizbel. The Alter Rebbe explains why. Because the body cannot contain it. That level of love and awe of the neshama without a body, the body cannot contain. So even a tzaddik gomer who cannot reach that level of dichila rechima and connection to God down below, because the body, the physical body, just simply does not have the capacity to experience something of such power. Like when Nadav and Avihu tried to experience something, what happened? Their very bodies got consumed with fire and their souls expired. I'm not saying that's the example for this, but just to show you that it's like a surge of energy that's so powerful that a body cannot contain, even the body of a tzaddik gomer. Hare, so this is the Rebbe Rashab now concludes, Shemitzad, etzema islapshus. This is not due, because you're talking about a tzaddik gomer, this is not due to the weakness of the person, meaning some people just not on that level of serving God. It's due to the very fact, like etzema islapshus, due to the very fact that the soul entered and engaged and manifested and clothed itself. Remember, b'derech islapshus. We spoke earlier that islapshus means it's grasped by, it's contained by the body. The etzem islapshus caused that the ava v'yira of the soul, the love and reverence of the soul, should be concealed and limited. The two words he kept using, misalim v'nigbal, concealed and limited. Hare, she'islapshus be'evri aguf. He's going back to the beginning of the moshel that he began in the bottom of last page. So we see from this that the manifestation and the enclothing of the soul and its faculties in the evri haguf, in the limbs of the body, goyrem hisalmus ba'keches, cause a concealment in the faculties, ubchinis hagbala v'akshama. So a concealment is one, hagbala, limitation, and akshama, a corporeality, or you can say a tangibility, or a something that makes it more material oriented. And this is the moshel, and now he concludes back to cheshach. Remember at the bottom of last page, he said that the second thing in darkness is not just its etzem entity, the essential entity, but that it conceals, limits, and blocks the flow of light. So now he says, this is what we say. All this comes to explain what it means that darkness darkens the light, and it's in a state of absence of light. Besides the other thing in cheshach, which is that it's a mitzias mitzaratzmei, a cheshach mitzarat, besides the fact that it is an entity of its own, shehein hakelim de evri aguf atzman, which refers to the kelim of the evri aguf atzman. Remember, the limbs of the body are not just blocking the energy, the light, and limiting the light, they also are an entity of their own. So there too, you see both things, that the very body and its fat and its limbs and organs has an entity of its own. It exists. It's not just absence of light, of divine light of the soul. And it has a second thing, that it conceals and limits and materializes the energy and the light of the divine soul. And that's how he concludes the moshel that he gave to understand what means darkness having both these elements. And here he spells it out clearly, that the cheshach b'fnei atzmei is like the kelim of the evodim themselves. It exists, but in addition to that, it does another thing, which it conceals the light of the soul, the ava v'yira and so on that we learned before, the understanding, and even the faculties of sight and sound and so on. But you already see here that transforming, in other words, the evodim of the guf, when you transform darkness, means you're going to transform, not just that you're going to make that the body and its faculties should allow the divine soul to shine through them, but it will also transform the very body itself, which we learned earlier about, where the body will actually nourish the soul, but he hasn't said it right now. Just pointing out, he's setting the stage to understand what it means, not just letting the light shine through, but also transforming the very thing that concealed the light. Its very essence, that its own personality. Okay, so with that, we conclude this paragraph. And let me pause here. If anybody wants to ask anything, because now the next section is going to go into the next stage of this discussion. So this is pretty much a self-contained 2 pages, the paragraph that we just learned. Obviously, it's all one long flow, but that's where we are right now. Okay.
So when he's talking here about the helem, the choshech, the guf that the choshech is, he's not explaining it really what it means. They have nothing. It's a guf. It's a guf. A guf has nothing in it. That's what it means, right? Not explaining it.
I'm not sure why you say that. He just gave a whole explanation of how the body and its faculties conceal and limit the power and intensity of the soul on its own.
That's a header oil. That's a header oil. But he said milvad.
Because he's coming to explain that cheshach has 2 things. Then there is the very existence of the darkness as a bria b'fnei atzmei, like the body and its evodim. Yeah, correct.
Which means the body itself, nothing, no chayes in it. The body itself has nothing to. It's not. It's a cheshach. It's nothing. I'm correct.
It's an entity of its own. The body is not just absence of soul. It's an entity of its own. It's a keli. Yeah, correct.
But it's a keli with maybe without oil. Maybe, I don't know. There's nothing.
One second. In cheshach, there are 2 things: the existence of cheshach as an entity, just like there's a tree and there's a bird and there's light. There's an entity called cheshach. That's like the entity of the body and its limbs. Then there's another aspect to it, the fact that it conceals the light. Heder ha'er, like you say, helam v'hagbolas ha'er. That's the part of the body, what it does to the neshama. So there's 2 things here.
Yeah,
not
2
one
things.
or the other. It's both. What is the problem with that?
No, I have a very hard time to understand, because header oil, I understand. It's malim on oil.
And is there a body, or is the body just the absence of oil?
It means that there is connection to the oil, but it's an absence on oil.
Well, who says connection? No connection. Is the body just the absence of light, or is it also an entity of its own? Obviously, it's an entity. Your arms, your legs, your whole body exists. Same thing with cheshach. Cheshach is not just heder ha'er, it's also mitzias b'fnei atzma, a bria b'fnei atzma. He spoke before about 2 opinions in this. And now he's saying that cheshach has both elements. The 2 opinions you understood? There's one opinion that cheshach has no mitzias of its own. The emes is it does. That's what he's pointing out here on the previous page.
I understand that. But when you're saying header or air, that means...
I'm not understanding. Are you asking a question or not sure?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, yes, the body has a mitzias of its own. It's not just the absence of soul. It exists.
I'm right to say that header or air means that it's darkness, but you have to eliminate. You have to say there is no oil. That's why it's darkness. There is a shayches. But when you're talking about... I don't know what
you're saying right now. It's very simple. The body conceals the essential power of the soul. When the soul is in Gan Eden, on its own, it can serve God in a much higher level than when it's in the body. So the body is concealing and limiting the power of the soul, just like the physical eye limits the ability to see endlessly. That you understand?
Yeah, but that means
that's called heder ha'ir.
Right. But that means that when there is no oil, there's no header oil. I understand it. This is I have a hard time to understand.
What is the problem? So I'm not sure. What's the question? I don't get it. And then there's another thing.
I understand this. I don't understand the other thing.
Okay, listen. We went over it 3-4 times. Unless somebody can explain to me what your question is, I don't know what to say. We're just repeating ourselves. Listen, there are other people. There are other people. One second. There are other people in the group here.
Asking you, the Harema asks me. This is
I don't
something
want to
that.
go. Listen. I think we're both intelligent people. We repeated ourselves 4 or 5 times. Why don't you listen to what I'm saying? 1 second. There's a lot of people in this class. This is being recorded. We're repeating ourselves 4 or 5 times. I'm considered a pretty good teacher. I don't understand your question. If somebody can explain to me the question, I don't understand your question. I really don't. And that, so let's stop here. We could take it. We could talk about it later. I don't know what to say. We're going in circles here. Is there anyone on the class here can understand what is going on here?
No, I don't understand the question either. Maybe Rav Teichel should go back and listen to the prior process.
I understand. He spoke before about Helen Atzmi.
We're going again and again. Okay. We need to move on. You're going to have to talk about it later.
He's just been explaining it to you. He's just been explaining what choshech is for the past 45, 60, 75 minutes.
What is choshech, not what is Helen oil. Header oil, I understand that. But you want to say that there is something that is not connected to oil.
There's a physical body. Okay, look. Let's take this. Fine. Okay. Either we'll talk about it later, or we can discuss it with others.
I have a different question, if I could ask, please. Which I want to understand the relationship between symptom and on the one hand versus darkness. Meaning we've learned before here and in Samach Vav, it says like in order to appreciate Elokus in a higher world like Gan Eden, you have to leave behind its ein arach, whatever godliness means or can be understood in a lower world. As you elevate to a higher world, there's no distance between the two. I mean, there's no comparison. It's a completely different dimension. And so in that sense, you were talking here about the level of alakus that's apparent for tzaddik gamor, his neshama in this world versus, let's say, in Gan Eden. So that's a matter of tzimtzumim. But this here, we're talking about darkness. Is there a relationship between these two concepts, or are they different understandings of what it means to have a diminishment of alakus?
Between which two concepts? Can you just tell me which two?
Well, one concept is tzimtzumim, that godliness, alakus, is diminished as it comes from a higher level to a lower level. And the other concept is the concept of darkness, of a concealment of light, or of an actual different entity called darkness. And I'm asking, you could say, Yitzchak, these are the same things, just using different terminology. Or you could say, no, these are two different concepts.
I would wait to see how the Rebbe Rashab continues discussing now the topic, because he's going to go back to Tzimtzum when he wants to. He hasn't yet addressed the Tzimtzum in this context. So I'd be patient with this before commenting on it.
Rabbi Yitzchak, thank you very much. You explained my question. That was my question.
Okay, good. Baruch Hashem.
So what's the question? Whether Tzimtzum and Cheshech are the same concept?
You could say that, yeah. The Pashtus, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the Rebbe Rashab is the one that introduced, as I said, the last 5, I would say 400 pages have been about the transformation of the Tzimtzum. If you go back to the Pesach Ma'amorim Ayin Hey, middle of volume 2, that's where he began discussing that it's not just about bringing light, but also transforming the Tzimtzum. And he, because And there he spoke about that we don't bypass the symptom, we don't override it, we don't surrender to it, but we actually transform it. It's a whole discussion. So obviously it all comes together, and we're middle of the subject matter. So I will definitely address it because it's part of a flow. So I don't know, I don't know if you were around, Yitzchak, when we were learning that, but that goes literally hundreds. We're talking about hundreds of pages of discussion. The whole topic of Ein Oid, which follows V'yadaita Yem V'shavesa Lebavecha Ke'avayu Alekim B'Shamayim B'Mal Ba'aretz Mitachas Ein Oid, all began the Shvuos Maimorim Ayin Hey that follow the Pesach Maimorim that talk about this point. How is it possible that we can experience, and you've heard me review this many times, maybe it's time for me to review it again. How is it possible that in a post-symptom reality, we can have pre-symptom consciousness, or the other way around? In a post-symptom consciousness, we could have pre-symptom reality when the whole existence is predicated on symptom, on concealment. And he discussed the idea of that the whole symptom is in order to bring Gilui, and the whole Gilui is in order for it to come through the symptom, that ultimately the whole purpose of Ur before the symptom is to enter existence after the symptom. And the way we do it is because we understand that symptom is not an end in itself. Symptom is a means, and therefore it can be transformed. We can transform the symptom, which in the person's life is the nefesh abamis, the animal soul that conceals the divine soul that we're learning here, is actually the force of symptom concealing the divine within us and within existence. And we have the power to counter that and firstly reveal the divine, and then ultimately to transform the darkness, which is ultimately Einoid, not just Havayu Elakim B'Shamayim B'Mal V'Aretz Mitachas. So I don't know if you recall all this, but I can't tell you how many times I've reviewed it, just not recently in all detail. But that is the flow that goes, what I just described is the flow that goes all the way back from literally probably 400, no, probably less, 300 pages maybe, or 350 pages, something like that. And it's all part of the discussion in the Torah of the Magid of how after the Parsa of Atzilus, we can experience Alikus in Biyat, just as it is before in the Atzilus and higher. So ultimately the goal is interface, the interface of existence with the divine. But that interface can be that you bring the divine into existence, but you don't necessarily transform the very darkness that allowed existence to be here in the first place. But the goal here is, as we've been learning, is transformation, not just dispelling the concealment, but transformation of the very body and transformation of the very darkness. So we're middle of this whole topic. The Rebbe Rashab is going to get back to it big time when he comes back to Ein Oid. So all this is part of that bigger discussion. I'm only pointing it out because some of the question you asked and other questions are really trying to push it. The Rebbe Rashab is in the middle of developing exactly this point. And right now he's talking about it in the context of Cheshach. As you're going to see in the next paragraph now, he's going to start discussing it in the context of Addis and Caitlyn and coming back to the symptom and everything. So it's all going to come together.
Okay, wonderful, perfect. That was wonderful framing of where we are holding and how what we're learning now relates to that larger framework. That was wonderful. Thank you very much for explaining. Wonderful answer.
Rabbi
Thank
Jacobson,
Okay, so let's continue. And he's going to say,
Rabbi, did you hear my question?
I didn't. What's your question?
Here, the Rebbe uses the term Helam v'Hagbala. Hagbala. Normally, it seems like in Chassidus, much more common to hear Helam v'Hester. And I want to know two questions. I've been struggling with the difference between what is the difference between Helam and Hester, those two terms. And the second one, what is the difference here between Hester, the more seems to be more common use, and Hagbala, which is the Rebbe uses it here. Helam v'Hagbala. You don't mind.
Well, if you really want to go more specific, if you go back to the bottom of page 1310, he says these words. Machshich ala mailim alav, umagbil oisei, umaynei hispashtus v'gili ha'er. He actually uses three expressions. So that's first of all. The fact that in some places the language is used one way or another is very common, because in each place the Rabbeim are using what they feel is needed in this particular area, context. Helam v'Hester really is redundant in one way because they're very synonymous. The reason there's two expressions is Helam means concealed, Hester means covered up. So in some places, Hester is a little deeper than Helam. But in Helam and Hester, there's also siluk, like we spoke, removed. It's so concealed, it's totally concealed. Helam can mean diminished and not completely covered. Hester is a stronger covering. Sometimes it says that Helam is Helam ba'atzmai. It means you yourself are concealing it. Hester is another thing that's blocking it. Like, for example, if you yourself close your eyes, something is concealed. But if you put up a curtain, you're using a foreign object to stop the light from coming in. So basically, Helam is more something you do internally. You can conceal yourself, and Hester is an object you use to conceal. That's generally the difference in that context. In the context of Mailim and Magbil, here, he intentionally wants to say that darkness, or in the context of the body and the limbs, don't just conceal the divine light, they limit its flow. That on its own, it's bligvul, let's say vision, or the power of seichel to understand godliness, and in the body, it's limited. And finally, the third thing he uses here is hakshama. That it's hakshama, like he says the three things. He says, hisalmus, hagbolav, hakshama, that it makes it much more materialistic as opposed to more ethereal as it is on its own. So that's how I see it. That's the context. That's what he wants to explain here, because he also wants to explain how he wants to explain the anatomy of what darkness is and what effect it has. And these are the three effects he's talking about here. Okay?
Yep, thanks.
And the example of this, Yuvon Lamaila. From this, we'll understand, from this example of what we spoke about darkness and the faculties, we'll understand it above, Bislapshus ha'eres b'kelim. Remember, the slapshus of Keiches HaNefesh, be'evri haguf, the soul and its faculties into body, was an example that he gave all the way in the beginning, literally in the first chapters of Ayin Beis, in the beginning of Ayin Beis, for what? He then came back and said, this is an example for Addis and Caitlyn. Because remember, the energies and containers in the worlds, whether it's Atzilus, Bria, Tzir, Asiya, are all evolve, and they ultimately evolve into the faculties and their containers in the human body. Like he says in Tanya, Nishtal Shlumehen. So just like Chachma inside of us, Chachma Bina Das has the energy of intellect. Inside the Moyach Gashmi, which is the Keli, the physical brain, and Ava V'yira and the other midas are in the physical heart, and the power of vision is in the eye, and the power of hearing is in the ear, etc. So too, Chachma Vatzilus and Bina Vatzilus and Dasa Vatzilus have an Ur and a Keli. So now he's going to go and explain how it is in the Addis and Caitlyn, which is going to bring it back to the larger picture of how we draw down Elikus, not only into the Kalim, but we actually transform the Kalim. Now, you may remember that a big part of the discussion was that the root of the Kalim are higher than the root of the Ur. You're going to see all this come together now in the next pages. Now, obviously, as I said, this is going to take quite a while to develop, but just keep that in mind. If you go back to page 1209, and then later when he spoke about the Rishimu, if you remember. 1209 and then 1267 and on, he talks about Addis and Caitlyn. So Addis and Caitlyn is just another way, is Lamaila, what we call Neshama and Guf. So the Addis and Caitlyn and Ruchnius and Lamaila is the Neshama and Guf within each one of us. So whatever is explained about one can be applied to the other. And that's what he's going to be doing now. So he's bringing it back now to the broader picture. And he uses what we said to Neshama Beguf as an example for the Addis and Caitlyn above. And that's going to further explain this whole Einoid, that we don't just bring Eid into Keli, if you remember, but the Keli itself reveals a level that's higher than Eid, called the Helam Ha'atzmi. And the Keli, which is rooted in the Shimu, is higher than the Kav. All this is going to come back. So in truth, if you really want to understand it well, you probably have to go back and refresh yourself from those pages I just gave, 1209 and 1267 and on. And now we're in 1311. So he's going to say like this. Because the Kalim, Kalim are fundamentally a state of concealment. That's what a Kali is. Which means it has substance, like Choshech has an entity. Its entity is a state of concealment. It's not a state of revelation. Oyer, the personality of Oyer is to reveal. Keli is a Helam Be'etzem Mahusam. It's an entity that's self-contained. It's not there to reveal, it's actually there to receive, if anything. But right now he's saying Helam Be'etzem Mahusam, the Gam, and additionally, like we said about Choshech, they also conceal the energies within them and limit them. Let me explain what this means. When God created existence, he wants a dira b'tachtenim, right? A home in tachtenim. Now, for there to be a home in tachtenim, you need two things. You need tachtenim. You need an entity that's worth talking about. To say that God is going to have a home in a place that's just the absence of light doesn't make any sense. A home, like a mishkan, means that you're residing somewhere. But at the same time, you call that somewhere tachtenim. You don't call it elyenim. You don't call it oir. The Alter Rebbe says in chapter 36 in Tanya, tachtenim, not in physical space, the lowest. Tachtenim means in their level of concealment. They're totally concealed. The divine is so concealed, that's why it's called tachtenim. Now, is this state of concealment an existence, or is just the absence of light? In other words, if you just shine light, the tachtenim would disappear. You can't say that because that's not the Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu is they did it with tachtenim. He actually created Bereshis bara Lakim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. There's a heaven, there's an earth, tzva shamayim, tzva aretz. All the creatures of heaven, the creatures on earth, Daimem, Tzameya, Chai Medab, the millions and billions and trillions of different species and cells and DNA, etc., all exist. However, its state of existence is one that conceals the divine energy within it. So it has two elements to it. And it's necessary because you can't transform something that doesn't have substance. So on one hand, Kalim represent God's power and God's will. God's will and desire and power to create a defined identity. Oir is God's power to reveal his energy within that identity. So when you say Oir HaChochma and Klei HaChochma, the real difference in their roles, because frankly, as I pointed out many times, there's no Kalim above, there's no physical Kali. In the physical world, a Kali you could say is a cup of wine. The wine is the Oir and the cup is the physical Kali. But what is it in Ruchnis? In Ruchnis, you're not going to find physical Kalim. So what is the meaning of a Kali? So the answer is, a meaning of a Kali is an identity. An identity by its very nature is something that's concealed because you say it's Chachma and it's not Bina. That's what it is. The Oir of Chachma reveals the divine energy within Chachma. So Oir represents more the divinity within the item, within the object or the entity. And Keli represents the very structure of the entity. And to make a dir b'tachtein, you need both. You need Oir and Keli. Oir is me'ein hamoir. It reflects the divine. And Keli is the object itself. I'll give an example in a very nigladika example, a simple example. Every mitzvah we do. Take the mitzvah of talis or tefillin. Okay? So we say, Asher Kedushan Mitzvahs V'Tzivanu La'aniach Tefillin. The Asher Kedushan Mitzvahs V'Tzivanu is the common expression used on all mitzvahs. Al tifas talis, al achilas matzah. But imagine you only said Asher Kedushan Mitzvahs V'Tzivanu. Would you fulfill the mitzvah? No. Because you're just talking about God sanctifying us and commanding us to do a mitzvah. But you need the actual mitzvah. You need the matzah, you need the talis, you need the tefillin. On the other hand, if you only had the second half of the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, al achilas matzah, or al anachas tefillin, it's not enough, because you also want to have the divine mitzvah within it. So you want to have the physical object called tefillin. It's made of cloth, of animal hide that was sanctified. Parshas of the Torah were written on it. So now it became tefillin. Tefillin shel rosh, tefillin shel yad. You bind your mind and heart with it. You make this bracha. And you do two things. You're bringing down divine light, Asher Kedushan Mitzvahs V'Tzivanu, but also Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, for all that, for practical purposes, is also part of the divine. But you're bringing the divine into a particular object, because that's tachtonim, the very tefillin. And you do it differently on a talis, and you do it differently when you eat matzah. And the same thing with the lulav on the mitzvah of the daled minim. And every mitzvah has its particular keli. That's the object of the mitzvah. And there's the kedusha of the elikus and the mitzvah of Hashem that he wants you to do that. That's the oir. You need both. So the keli symbolizes what he calls here helem be'etzem mahusam. What he means by helem, he doesn't mean helem be'etzem mahusam as in concealing God. He means that its focus is on the structure of it, not on the divine element. And then there's another thing that kelim do. They conceal the divine energy within it. So these are, now of course when you do a mitzvah, you're revealing the divine energy through the keli. So the example I gave can be a little confusing. I gave the example just to explain the difference between keli and oir. That one is the entity. So when God created the world is the keli, and the elikus in the world is the yehi oir, the yehi rakia, the divine energy that's within existence. And you need both. And now he's going to explain how kelim have both elements. He just said, one is what they are be'etzem mahusam, and the other is that they conceal. The Rebbe's brother, Yisrael Aryaleib, once said, I heard in the name of Rab Nachum Goldschmidt, he was asked the difference in Eir and Keli. He said Eir is la'atzmei and Keli is lazulas. That Eir means that something that relates to yourself, and Keli is as you relate to another. So as soon as the Eibishter has the power of Keli, the koyach ha'helem in elikus is critical to create kelim, because to have another, you have to conceal yourself. So basically, the power of the rishimu, and higher than that, its root in the koyach ha'gvul of Ein Sof, is this power that he's talking about. So its essential power is a concealment of divine consciousness in order to create an entity, to create another consciousness. That's keli. And Oir is the divine consciousness. And then they, of course, come together, ultimately. Here he's focusing on the very keli right now before they come together. So I hope that helped understand this whole picture here. And now he's going to explain how this concealment happens. Because remember, when you go lifnei symptom, in the beginning of the whole process, so first, I'm not talking now the Helem Atzmi and Atzmos. You have what the Arizal says, divine consciousness, divine energy filled all of consciousness, and there was no room, there was no room for any other entity. There were no Kalim, no room for Kalim and no room for Elamus. Then Hashem symptom atzme, the silika er al atzad. He concealed the energy, and it revealed the power of Gvul that was there, but was not revealed. And now the Rishima emerges. The Rishima is a state of concealment, and then comes the Kav that energizes and reveals the Kalim that start emerging after the Tzimtzum. So now he's going to explain how this process evolved. This is Salmus. So he says, "V'tchilas Salmus." That the beginning of the concealment, that there was an air that was higher than what manifested in Caleb. He's going to say, I think he's going to explain it soon, but a while back, we learned that when the air evolves, if you recall that the first Keli is in Akudim. You have 10 Eiris, Akud b'klei echad, 10 energies in one container. Like the example of the conception of a child, where there's one cell, and everything is concentrated in that one cell. Or like the beginning of creation, everything in one keli, everything was bereshis bara l'kim sh'mayim v'sa'aretz, and then later it started branching off into details. The cell begins to split. So it says, we learned earlier that the air goes through 3 stages. There's the air on its own. There's the air that's higher than being manifest in containers. And then there's the air as it enters the container. So just like as we say about neshama and guf, the energy of the soul is there before it enters a body. And then when the child, the fetus, begins to develop, the energy of the soul begins to manifest within the kalim of the body until it fully develops and a new child is born. So he says that the first concealment is the concealment of the air that's higher than the slapshas b'kalim. This will soon be understood better. Let's just read on. You'll see in a moment. And this concealment is in all the levels of kalim, also higher than Atzilus. Because in Atzilus, you're talking already Eiris and kalim, that's Islapshus b'kalim. But when you talk about that's higher than Islapshus, you're talking about what the kalim are doing to the Eiris higher than Atzilus, not as Eiris maslabish and kalim. He's going to explain. I know this needs more explanation, but let's read and then I'll explain. For example, engraved letters. So there's written letters and there are engraved letters. Now, engraved letters, Chassidus explains, is the level that's higher than Addis and Caitlyn. Because Addis and Caitlyn means just like a soul goes into a body, the same thing is you take, let's say, ink, and you write on parchment a Sefer Torah or Tefillin or mezuzahs. So the Eir is connecting with the Keli. The ink is a separate entity, and the Keli, which is the parchment, and the letters that you write the letters with the ink on the parchment. But they're 2 separate entities. They're just connecting with each other. Chassidus explains earlier in Ayin Beis, and he's definitely relying on this, I see, is the letters are made of the Eir itself, because there's no ink. You take a piece of a stone, and from that itself, you make letters. Letters are kalim. The kalim are within the Eir itself. And yet, even though it's in the Eir itself, he says, so even though it's made of the stone itself, so you think then it should be like letters of light. No, when you look at it, you'll see it's like a darker shadow. When you take a stone and you engrave letters in it, so the letters are of the stone itself, but they still darken that area. That's why you see an aleph or a beis. It's darker. It does speak about chkike meneu bei, which is by the luchis, it was engraved through and through, and then it doesn't darken it because the light shines through it because it's through and through the stone. So an aleph would look like an aleph made of light because it's shining through the whole stone. But if you engrave something not through and through, then the area where the letters are still darken the bright stone that you made it in. Usually it refers to the sapphire stone, which was the Evan Sapir of the luchis, but here he's not talking about the luchis, obviously. So it darkens it. So what do you see from this? That even though the keli is not yet a metzias on its own as in Atzilus, Addis and Caitlyn, even though it's only engraved letters, there's still a darkening, there's still a concealment. Even though it's revealing a letter, but it's darker than the actual stone itself, and that's why it's like a shadowish. Yeah. And what's the example for Esis Achkika? Not the Addis and Caitlyn of Atzilus. The Dugma Mizela Maila B'chinas Caitlyn Shebekeser. The example for the engraved letters is the Caitlyn and Keser, not Caitlyn and Atzilus. This we learned earlier, all the way in volume 1. That's where I remember it from, where he spoke about this level of Kalim of Kesed. The Ima Yesha Ena Malima Ala Er Hamislabish B'Teicham, that even though they don't conceal the light that's manifest within them, because the Aleph is a revealer, not a concealer. But the mere fact that they're containers, okay, I need to explain what this means. Nevertheless, being that they're containers, they conceal the energy that's higher than the level of containers. It says elsewhere, was also explained earlier. So let me explain what this means. I'm going to give an example of a teacher. A teacher conceals his ideas when he has to explain it to a student that's of a lower level. He has to put it into words, examples, and so on. The ideas are concealed. But what ideas are concealed? Only the ideas as they are on the caliber, on the level of the teacher. He can't share all the brilliance that he has. No, the air that's l'mayla mislapshus b'kelim are concealed. But he's not concealing the air that's mislapshus b'kelim. That which he does convey, the words he's speaking to the student, is not a concealing, that's revealing. It's just compared to the air that's higher than what's going into the kelim, which the student doesn't even know, that's being concealed. But the examples he gives, the words he uses, are all revealing. Then there's another level of concealment, which he hasn't discussed yet, that the kelim are actually concealing even the energy that's in them, not just the energy that's above them. So there's two levels of concealment here. One is a concealment of energy that's higher than Islapshus B'Kelim. It's also, in other words, the first step is the teacher has to somewhat quiet down, or somewhat silence, or conceal his very brilliance. Then there's a second thing. Then he takes the air and puts it into the keli. So initially, that's a revelation. We're going to learn that there's a concealment there too. But compared to what we're talking about now, that's the keli, like he says here. Even though. So if you take, let's say, a big barrel of wine, and then you want to pour it into a cup to make kiddush, or a big bottle of wine, you can't pour the whole barrel into the cup. So most of it remains concealed, so to speak. You pour a little in the cup, but what is in the cup is not concealing the wine. The cup actually is containing the wine. But that's what he says. It's not concealing that which was within it, but it's concealing that which is above it. Someone says, is that all the wine you have? Absolutely not. There's a whole barrel. So that's what he's saying right now. That's Esis Achkika. Esis Achkika, the letters are revealing the aleph of whatever the letters that you're writing are revealing words. But compared to the stone itself, which is like the oir, that's higher than Islapshus B'Kelim, it's machshich. It makes its shadow, it creates some shadow, some darkening. Now, why is this so relevant? We're going to learn why. But clearly, you see, he's moving now into a far more higher level of discussion. Till now, we were just talking about Kelim concealing oir. Now he's talking about the Helam be'etzem uhusam, and the air and the Helam that they are ma'ilem ala eris magbilim mesam. I'm assuming, I'm not sure, but it could be that these are the two things. That Kelim are be'etzem, they're concealers, so therefore they're concealing, like he says, even the air that's lamaila, that even the ma'ir shal lamaila b'chinas islapshus b'kelim. like the chikit. I don't know. I don't want to conclude with that. We'll see where he goes with this. But that's what he said so far. Any questions? Now you see the Rebbe Rashab, how easily he changes gears from something a little more balabatish explaining, and he's going right now into the high levels of Addis and Caitlyn. But it's all going to come together. I assure you that. So even if it's a little confusing, just be patient. But now he's going to say, he's going to give an example of where do you see such a level of concealment. So he says, V'hu al derech peulas hatzimtzum harishin v'yisalmus v'sila ka'erein sof hablikvul shenizbar le'il. What we're discussing now is like the effect of the tzimtzum, the first symptom in concealing and removing, which really means complete concealment of the infinite divine light that was discussed earlier. So what are we talking about? So let me explain. Let me just see if what I just want to see what the Rebbe Rashab is going to actually say. Yeah. So he's referring to something he discussed in volume 2, what I referred earlier, that the tzimtzum had two effects. So let me explain. Before the tzimtzum, you had the Eir HaBlikvul of God, which is God's infinite energy, the capacity to do anything he wants without any limitations. But you also have that within Lifnei HaTzimtzum itself, if you remember, Shiur Atzmei B'Koyach, in the infinite possibilities of the artist who can create infinite types of art, he chooses to create one type of art. These are called the 10 hidden spheres. So that's called the Eir HaGvul. So we have the Eir HaBlikvul, infinite capacity, and Eir HaGvul, finite capacity. We have one more thing, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the Koyach HaGvul, the power to limit. Now, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, all of this is one seamless entity. It's all God's power. You can't distinguish between them. So the Tzimtzum now came and did two things. One is it concealed the infinite possibilities, because as long as they were shining in a revealed way before the Tzimtzum, that finite 10 spheres can't emerge. I mean, anything can emerge because God can do whatever he wants, but it wouldn't be logical. So the first thing he needs to is recede and conceal the infinite divine light. The second thing it did was it diminishes the finite light that it can begin to emerge into a post-Tzimtzum reality. So the Tzimtzum conceals the infinite light, and what it does to the finite light, it diminishes it into a kav. The Rishimu is the Koyach HaGvul, the power to create finite, the root of the containers. The kav is the root of Eris, but the Eir HaGvul, diminished. And then there's the Eir HaBlikvul, which recedes in the background, which ultimately will also flow into the picture once there's Aveda and once we draw it down. So what he's saying now is, so you see here, there's a concealment of the infinite light, even though we're not talking about the concealment of the light within the container. We're talking about that the Tzimtzum, which here he's comparing to the Kalim, is concealing something that's completely above, something Lamayla Mislapshas became Eir HaBlikvul. That's what he says right here in this short piece here. Now, I know that for many of you, you don't remember this discussion probably, maybe you do, because it goes back hundreds of pages when this was elaborated on. So the truth is, to really appreciate what he's saying here, you have to go back, because you could ask the question, why is he bringing all this here? Why is it relevant to our conversation here? But you're going to see it's going to be very relevant, because he wants to explain that we're not just here to bring the Blikvul back or the Eir HaGvul, we want to also transform the Keli itself, but he's not there yet at all. So he's going back, literally asking us to step back and let's review the process of how Eir and Keli interact and how the earliest states of concealment began with its symptom. That's why I was saying earlier, let's not bring symptom in until the Rebbe Rashab does, because he's going to bring it in when he wants to bring it in his own way, which he's beginning to do now. Now, I hope this was at least to some extent understandable. If not, I'm happy to answer any questions, because it's going to get a little more complicated before it gets clear. Just be aware, because the Rebbe Rashab is bringing back all the ideas of tzimtzum and and keli and so on. But I can assure you that this will be very clear once we get through the initial steps that he's introducing now. Does anybody want to ask anything?
Yes, when the Rebbe there says that well, you were referred a little earlier to akudim. Is that that's, to my understanding, that's already in a keli of some sort, the keli of akudim. Yet that's keser already. So does he mean above akudim, the light above akudim?
No, keser, for all practical purposes now, keser and akudim are in the same. You could strike from the record the mention of akudim. I knew it would confuse some, so forget about akudim. He doesn't mention akudim, so let's not mention it. He's mentioning the kelim of keser.
Mm-hmm. But since I brought it up, can you refer to that? I mean, it is.
No, because I didn't expect to go. I only mentioned it as the first place that a keli emerges. He doesn't discuss it here.
Okay.
Now, he may discuss it earlier. If I recall correctly, there's the Oisis Achkika of Keser. That's not Minei Bay, but I think there's higher level where it's Minei Bay. But I don't know if that's Akudim either. I think that's also Primis Keser, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
Bottom line is Akudim, there's only one container, so it's not really so relevant here. Here he's talking that there are containers. So that's really what the subject is. But the first container is Akudim. Look, you know why I don't want to, because the truth is the containers begin, the Sheresh HaKelim is Rishimu, even higher than Akudim. And that he is going to discuss. So remember, Kelim is God's power to confine, to limit. The higher levels in the Shtalshalus, the energy is more dominant than the Keli. That's why Akudim, there's only one container. Is it a concealer? I don't know. He doesn't speak about that here. In Keser, the Kelim are already beginning to conceal the Er HaBlikvul, but also the fact of the matter that symptom now, he explained, also conceals the Er HaBlikvul. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And didn't we spend a long time in, I think it was volume 1, maybe volume 2, Esser Spheres of Ganuzos. That's already, even before the symptom, there's a limitation there, right?
That's only God's power to, and God's, and I explained that length, that there's no real limitation there at all. It's only God's revealing to us. He is envisioning existence and envisioning, like the artist envisioning creation, but it's not the actual limitation in any way.
Mm-hmm.
I have. I'm sorry, Eliezer.
That's why there's no Kelim before. That's why you need a tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is where it all starts emerging.
But this level you were talking about today, where you said the Abisher was thinking he had bleak wool, infinite spheros.
That's all in his consciousness. He's just envisioning. It's called. We learned that length. If you remember what we learned exactly what I just said. It even says that before the tzimtzum there are no levels altogether. So there's a whole letter from the Rebbe on this topic. Before the tzimtzum, you can't talk about levels in any real way. All you can talk about is God revealing to us that whatever happens after the tzimtzum, he already envisioned. That's essentially what's relevant here. So that's why you need a tzimtzum, because if it's all there, what do you need a tzimtzum for?
So we don't even refer to koach gavul lifnei tzimtzum?
Yeah, you call it koach gavul lifnei tzimtzum, the power of God to create the finite. There's no tzimtzum if there's no power to create a tzimtzum, right? There's no oir also, there's no power to create oir. There's also a level higher than oir, by the way. So there's God's capacity to do anything.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. You want to ask something?
Yeah, it's a gross oversimplification, but I'm trying to relate what happens at the highest levels to what happens at the lowest levels. And I'm just wondering if the very existence of Kalim and this distinction between or is sort of the Kalim, sort of the primordial precursors of Yeshus, and or is the perpetual existence of godliness. Is that can you say that, or is that too far of a gross
You have to define the word
oversimplification?
Yeshus for me to answer.
Otherness, something other than the
So I
essence
said
of
that
God.
before. I said
Yeah.
the concept of Keli is another. I said that
Yeah.
exactly from the Rebbe's brother.
Okay.
That's the word I used.
Okay.
Another or an identity. Keli
Yeah.
represents an identity, an entity.
Okay.
It represents the divine energy that relates to that identity. Well, the oir of that specific oir. Oir in general represents the divine. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what I said earlier. I said that explicitly.
Okay.
I'm wondering whether I should read the parentheses, which is going to definitely thicken the plot. Or do we stop here? Let me see. One minute, please. Okay. Let me just say this. I think it'll make things a little clearer. I just read on quickly, just to see the flow and the context. The Rebbe Rashab is definitely leading us back to what he said before, that just as that the faculties as they come in the body get concealed and more materialistic, the same thing he's going to explain that the Kalim do to the Oir in Atzilus on a higher level. So I'm assuming the reason he begins even higher, the Salmus, is because he wants to, in a thorough fashion, connect it back to what we learned earlier and understand the concept of concealment altogether. This, by no means, is this concealment of Eir HaBligvul, the concealment of the Eiris within the Kalim themselves. In other words, what we learned before, that the soul enters into the body, you can't compare, even a Tzaddik Gomer, you can't compare as Aveda below to Aveda above, or the understanding of the Muhus Eir Eliki, the very personality of the divine energy in Gan Eden, to the way we learn the Metzias of Eir Eliki below. That is the Kalim are concealing the Eir, like in Atzilus and lower than Atzilus, we're going to learn. Actually, I think it's lower than Atzilus, because that's how Neshama comes down in a guf, and that's the explanation of let me correct, that's in Biyah. But he's saying Hadugmazeh, we'll understand it from Addis and Caitlyn above, So he's taking us back all the way to the earliest version, the earliest stages, I should say, of concealment, where there the concealment is not quite as pronounced. Because to say that you conceal bli gvul doesn't mean you're concealing the Eir Eliki in Gan Eden from the Neshama Beguf. It means you're concealing something that is completely beyond, but the Eir and the Keli is intact. The Keli is revealing that which is the Eir is coming down. Like I said before, the teacher is concealing the bli gvul that he has. He's not concealing his gvul. He's not concealing his Eir HaGvul. So what the Rebbe Rashab is clearly doing, and that's the context, he's taking us back to the earlier stages of Isalmus, and then he's going to bring it back down to what we're discussing now, these two aspects of Isalmus as it is in Addis and Caitlyn, as a Neshama Beguf comes down in Biyah, all the way down to this world. I just realized that when I read on, that's what it looks like here. First, I was thinking that he's going to explain these two levels and this highest levels, and it doesn't seem that way. Even though he does say the Kalim have two things, that's true, and with their Mailim on Eidus, so I think that remains critical, that even in the highest levels, as I explained, even before the symptom, even though there's no Kalim there, but the fact of the matter is that if you speak conceptually of the Eir HaGvul, or especially the Koyach HaGvul, there's an element of concealment there. When it emerges after the Tzimtzum, that becomes something that's an entity of its own, the Kalim. And then there's a second thing that they have, which is they conceal the Eirus. And that concealing is even on the highest levels of Eir HaBli Gvul, or Tchila Sei Salmus. But you see, it says Tchila Sei Salmus. It's the beginning of the concealment. It's not the end of the concealment. It's the highest levels. I don't know if what I just said helped. It helped me, but hopefully it helped you too.
What's the difference between those two types of concealments? You said that Kalim themselves are concealing, and they conceal the ore.
I gave a very practical example of a teacher
with the wine
and a student.
In the barrels?
The wine in the barrel is one example, but that's not the example I'm referring to. The teacher and the student. The teacher conceals all his brilliance and infinite possibilities. That's complete. That's concealed. And then there's another where that stage, the energy that goes, the ideas that go into the kalim for the student are not concealed, but then there's a level where that gets concealed as well. That's the difference. That's what he said here, that the pu'ulas at symptom on the bli gvul. We're talking now on the bli gvul, not on the gvul, like he said with the kalim of Kesa. Then we're going to speak about the Eris and Kalim and Atzilus. That's already bislapshus Eris bekalim. Here we're talking about that the concealment is of the Eris that's higher than Islapshus and Kalim. Keep that in mind. That's what he's discussing right now. So right now, my understanding is that he's just going through the whole process of concealment from the highest levels. I mentioned the second effect of the tzimtzum is that it actually affects also the air that mislabish in the keli. Like the kav is a much more diminished energy than the root of the kav before the tzimtzum. The root of the kav has to go through a tzimtzum to become a kav. That's a tzimtzum, a concealment of eris in keli. Whereas the concealment of the eir abligvul is a concealment of the eris that's higher than keli. That's what he said so far. I think I'm going to stop here before the parentheses, because the parentheses is going to require a whole lot, another layer of explanation. You're going to distinguish between the tzimtzum and the kalim. He said before that he gave an example, al derech pulas at tzimtzum, but it's only al derech because the kalim at the end of the day are not as concealing as the tzimtzum is, as he's going to qualify in the parentheses. But we'll go slowly. We'll go over it several times. Think of it as one of these pieces that takes 4, 5, 6 times until we really begin to understand. It's the only way we can do it properly. I'll say one final thing to keep this in mind. Remember the example I've given a number of times of the artist or of the architect. So when you look at a piece of art from the bottom up, all you see is the product of an artist. From this product, which has very defined parameters, we'll call them the 10 spheres, the world as we see it. It has trees, it has birds, it has animals, it has humans, it has mineral, and all the details of existence. So it's a grand universe, but slowly you come from the art, you contemplate that it didn't create itself, like we've learned, and slowly you begin the process of recognizing there's an artist. But you haven't met this artist. So there's many, many steps that we go from the gvul, the creation itself, which is gvul, the kalim, and we're already beginning to discover there's oyer inside it. There's an intention. The artist created the birds for a reason. He created the human beings for a reason. So you're discovering the oyers that are within the kalim, but in a very limited way. As you go higher, what happens is you come to realize, one second, you meet somebody that knows the artist, or you even meet the artist, and you realize that the artist is a lot higher than the art that he created. He's not just the sum of the parts. You realize that there's a lot more going on, and you even come to realize things in the art that you may not have seen initially, because it's really also has the ability to reveal deeper parts of the artist, deeper parts of his personality. This is a process of V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'odecha, mutfa, murgesh, muskel. The ladder we climb as we grow from children into adults, and as our emotions mature and our mind matures, and we're coming to understand more and more of the godliness within existence. So you're moving from kalim to in asiya, yitzira, bria, even to atzilus. But then the higher you go, the more you recognize the power of the that has been concealed. In other words, how much of God is really revealed in this world? We've learned before it's completely dark. But even with contemplation, how much of God is really revealed in his 10 spheres? God has the ability to create much more than 10 spheres. Spheres ain't kets. Infinite types of art. And you realize the artist can create much more than this. It's not just the depth of the artist within this one piece of art. You suddenly realize there are all kinds of other art he could have created. And then, and I'm going quickly here, this can be a lifetime journey. Then you realize he's not even defined by being an artist. There are things about him that have nothing to do with art. He can be a father, he can be a teacher, he can be something else. I'm talking about even on a human level, let alone God. So you see, as you go higher and higher, how many levels are concealed. As you go deeper and deeper, you come finally to a point where you realize it's all about God, and all this is just an expression of the divine. Now, the Eibishter still wants a dira b'tachtenim. He wants us in this limited piece of art to come to discover all those dimensions, all the way to the highest levels. But this is all still discovering the oyer. At some point, we're going to come to understand, what about the very power that God had to limit himself to create just 10 spheres and to create these kalim? The bird is just one container. We're not even talking about the divine wisdom within and design within the bird or within creation. And that's ultimately going to be the einoi, that the keli itself is going to reveal to us the deepest levels of the divine, the helam ha'atzmi and higher, that has the power to create. But before we get there, we first have to reveal the divine altogether. So we reveal the divine. So when you talk about Addis and Caitlyn, there's the Addis in the Caitlyn, there's the Addis a little higher than the Caitlyn, and even higher and higher and higher. He's now assuming that we understand all this, because we learned it at length. If you go back Ayin Beis, what he said here is I would say 100, maybe 100 or 200 pages earlier in Ayin Beis. So assuming that we learned it, we understand all this. So he's just summing up and saying, okay, this is Salmus of Addis and Caitlyn that we're talking about here, has two elements to it. The Keli itself is the etzem, like he says, a helam. And then there's what it conceals, the Addis. And slowly he's going to come back to, and slowly begins, where does this concealment begin? First is the concealment of the bli gvul, and then is the concealment also of the gvul, as we go all the way downwards. That is the context of this discussion here. I hope that was helpful. And that's going to ultimately come together as we're going to discover the light, then we're going to discover the deepest powers in the Keli itself. But you can't know that until you first discover there's an artist within the art. And then you come to discover that not only is there the brilliance of the oid of the artist, there's the brilliance even deeper of the keli of the artist, that he can have the power to contain it and to create a limited existence as we know it. And then it all comes together in that sense. I think Rabbi Gershom Ber Paharer was the one that said, in explaining these, he said that it's like you show a painting of a what is it? The painting of a farm to somebody. And the first thing they say, oh, this person who drew this farm must be a great farmer because he knows every detail of the farm. Then someone comes and says, no, even better. He must be a great artist because even though he's not a farmer, he's beyond being a farmer, but he's able to envision what a farmer knows. But he's beyond being a farmer. And then he comes to the third level where he's beyond being an artist and beyond being a farmer, and he's able to combine both because he's not the farmer, he's not the artist, which transcends being a farmer. Basically, it's not the Erakvul, it's not the Erablikvul, there's something beyond both, and therefore he's able to bring them both into reality. As I think an analogy, something like that. I have to remember exactly, but that's what I've heard. Anyway, so we're going to stop here at the bottom of 1311. I'm happy to take any questions, further questions, but we're going to learn it slowly, as I said. I think my last piece here will help a lot in putting things into the context necessary. Okay.
It was very helpful. Before you turn off the recording, and after everyone asks questions, I wanted to put in a plug for your Vort and for bringing for Chof Ches Nissan.
Okay, so let me just see if nobody has any questions. I'm going to stop right here at the bottom of page 1311.
Can I just put a plug in while you're still recording?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Rabbi Jacobson posted last night an audio recording of the speech or a vort he gave for bringing for Chof Ches Nissan this past Thursday night, and it is unbelievable. It is amazing. It's a must listen to for every chassid and frankly for every Jew, because Rabbi Jacobson traces the origins and the deepest meaning of the Rebbe's dictate tut alles was can do whatever you can to bring Mashiach. The Rebbe did everything he could, and what remains is that we have to do our part. He explains this in such great deep intellectual detail and practical detail that it's a must, because if you want to do your part to bring Mashiach, this is a great place to start thinking about it in your own terms, what it really means, both at a very deep spiritual level and also at a very practical level. And I have to say, Rabbi Jacobson, I don't know how much thought you gave to it, but this is one of their most elucidating, clear statements. It's very, very deep, and it's not something someone would say every Chof Ches Nissan. You must have given this tremendous thought. You really tried very hard to say what's something new we can do. How can we conceive of this in a way that we haven't conceived of this Inyan before, so that we can hasten the Vias of Mashiach, the coming of Mashiach. And it's very, very deep. It's very special. You must have thought very hard what you want to say, because it's very unique. I haven't heard you say this before. And I really encourage everybody listening and everyone in Ayin Beis class, and I'm going to encourage others to listen to this, because it's a very deep level of thought and also very practical. And beyond that, of course, the ultimate goal to have the Gula Shlema, Vamitis, of bringing Mashiach, is a practical matter. You will enrich your lives just as a simple, selfish matter. If you want to understand how to live with more godliness in your life, this is a must. So it's very, very special. I can't encourage people enough to listen to it. And it's really Rabbi Jacobson at his best. And I hope everyone gives it a shot. I'll give you back your 60 minutes if you don't like it. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobson.
Very appreciative. Thank you so much. Yes, I've given a lot of thought over many years, to be honest. Just not just before I gave this talk, but I appreciate your words, and I very much appreciate being appreciated.
Well, you deserve it because it was very special, and those Bahrain that you spoke to were very fortunate. And it's new. It's really new insight, and we all have to try to think what we can do in our own world, in our own lives, to bring more Elikus into the world. It's very, very special. I really, really appreciated it, and I don't know if you outlined your thoughts in advance or if it was extemporaneous, but it was absolutely brilliant. Really, very special.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, guys, I have a fan here.
Yeah, that's for sure. Also, marketing vice president.
Right.
But for the sake of the...
That's very kind of you. Thank you. And it's very much, to be honest, a lot of it is informed by us learning Ayin Beis, where especially now where we're learning, what is the reality of reality? And that is godliness. It's a big part of the discussion. And I think you can't really appreciate Mashiach and live Mashiach unless you somewhat come to realize that godliness is the more real than the physical reality that you think is real.
100%. I also liked how you challenged everybody to say you can't hasten Mashiach, and you can't encourage others and get others or even yourself to take practical steps to do it until you can define in your own terms what it means to you and what it means to bring more godliness into the world. And I thought that was brilliant. It seems obvious, but until you can explain it in your own simple terms to another, then you're not really making that next step to do whatever you can.
It's very much Chassidus applied in its fullest sense, to be honest.
100%. That's why I wanted to mention it, because it's very deep philosophy, but it's also very practical.
Thank you. Very kind of you. Thank you. And yes,
sure.
I hope it gets out there and share it with anyone you like. It's an hour exactly, by the way.
Yeah, I noticed you were very medactic on that. I wish Eliezer were on the call. I'll have to give him a call, but something tells me that whatever the materials, the text you're preparing for his curriculum that relates to this somehow.
That's the essence of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Shkoyach, anyways. I hope people listen to it.
Thank you very much, everybody.